The weight of silence. I had always been the one who bent. In 38 years of living, I had perfected the art of folding myself into whatever shape others needed me to be. My mother called it being considerate. My husband called it being supportive. I called it surviving. The morning of my birthday, I woke up at 5:30, just like every other day. The house was still and quiet. Wrapped in that particular silence that comes before dawn, I padded downstairs in my worn slippers, the ones with the hole near the big toe that I kept meaning to replace but never did. There were dishes in the sink from the night before, remnants of the elaborate dinner I had cooked for David's colleagues, wine glasses with lipstick stains, plates smeared with the remains of the beef Wellington I had spent 4 hours preparing. I washed them in the dark, letting the warm water run over my hands as I scrubbed away the evidence of another evening where I had smiled and nodded and asked all the right questions about quarterly reports and market projections, where I had refilled glasses and cleared plates while David held court, telling stories about his latest triumphs at the law firm, where I had been invisible except as an extension of his success. The coffee maker gurgled to life as I loaded the dishwasher. Through the kitchen window I could see Mrs. Patterson next door already tending to her garden, her gray hair catching the first rays of sunlight. She waved when she saw me, and I waved back, wondering if she had ever felt like a ghost in her own home. David came down at 7:15, already dressed in his charcoal suit, checking his phone as he descended the stairs. He kissed the top of my head absently, the way you might pet a dog that had performed a particularly good trick. "Coffee smells good," he said, pouring himself a mug from the pot I had prepared. "Did you remember to pick up my shirts from the dry cleaner?" "They're hanging in your closet," I replied, spreading jam on his toast the way he liked it, thick enough to taste but not so thick it would drip. "Perfect. Oh, and I need you to call my mother today. She's been asking about Christmas plans, and you know how she gets when we don't respond quickly enough." I nodded, adding "call Margaret" to the mental list that never seemed to get shorter. "Pick up David's prescription. Schedule the carpet cleaning. Cancel my book club meeting because David had invited clients over for dinner." Again. "I might be late tonight," he continued, scrolling through his emails. "Henderson wants to go over the Morrison case one more time before the hearing." "It's my birthday," I said quietly. David looked up from his phone, and for a moment, I saw something flicker across his face. Surprise, maybe, or annoyance that I had reminded him of something he had clearly forgotten. "Of course it is," he said, his voice taking on that smooth, lawyer tone he used when he was trying to cover up a mistake. "How could I forget? We'll celebrate this weekend. I'll take you somewhere nice." But I knew we wouldn't. Something would come up. A client emergency. A golf game with a partner. A sudden need to review briefs that couldn't wait. There would be an excuse, delivered with that same practiced smile. And I would nod and say I understood, because that's what I always did. After David left, I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee and stared at the birthday cards I had arranged on the counter. 3 of them, one from my sister in Portland, one from my college roommate who still remembered dates that mattered, and one from David's mother that had arrived 2 days early with a $20 gift card to Target tucked inside. No card from my husband. I spent the morning doing what I always did. Laundry. Grocery shopping. Picking up dry cleaning, returning phone calls for David's busy schedule. At lunch, I treated myself to a salad at the cafe downtown, sitting alone at a table by the window and watching people hurry past on the sidewalk. A young couple walked by, the man carrying a bouquet of sunflowers, the woman laughing at something he had whispered in her ear. I couldn't remember the last time David had brought me flowers. The afternoon stretched ahead of me like an empty page. I could have done anything. Gone to a movie, visited a museum, called a friend and suggested we go somewhere together. Instead, I went home and started preparing dinner for the evening David had said he might be late for. At 6 o'clock, I called his office. His secretary, Jennifer, answered on the second ring. "Oh, hi, Sarah," she said, her voice bright and efficient. "David's already left for the Henderson dinner. Didn't he tell you? They're taking the Morrison team out to celebrate closing the case." The Morrison case. The one David had said they needed to review one more time. The case that had apparently been resolved successfully enough to warrant a celebration dinner that his wife knew nothing about. I hung up the phone and stood in my kitchen, surrounded by the ingredients for a birthday dinner I had been preparing for a man who wasn't coming home. The salmon I had splurged on sat on the counter, pink and perfect and expensive. The asparagus I had planned to roast with lemon and garlic, the chocolate cake I had baked from scratch, his favorite recipe, sitting under a glass dome like something precious and untouchable. The phone rang again. David this time. "Hey, honey." His voice was loud, competing with the background noise of what sounded like a busy restaurant. "I'm so sorry, but this Henderson thing is running long. Don't wait up for me, okay? We'll do something special tomorrow night." Tomorrow night. Always tomorrow night. "David," I said, gripping the phone tighter than necessary. "It's my birthday." "I know, sweetheart, and I feel terrible about it. But you know how important this client is. Henderson specifically requested that I join them tonight. It would be career suicide to say no." Career suicide. I wondered what it was called when you slowly killed yourself by degrees, one forgotten birthday at a time. "Make it up to you this weekend," he was saying. "Take you to that French place you like. Book a whole day at the spa if you want." But I didn't want a spa day. I wanted my husband to remember my birthday without being reminded. I wanted him to choose me over his clients just once. I wanted to matter enough to be worth a phone call before he made other plans. "Sure," I said, because it was easier than fighting. "Have fun tonight." I hung up and looked around my perfect kitchen. The kitchen I had designed and decorated and maintained while David built his career. The kitchen where I had cooked countless meals for his friends and colleagues and family members, where I had hosted birthday parties for everyone but myself. I took the salmon and put it back in the refrigerator. I covered the asparagus with plastic wrap. I cut myself a slice of chocolate cake and ate it standing at the counter, tasting the bitter sweetness of my own effort and care. That night, I lay in bed listening for the sound of David's car in the driveway. He came home at nearly midnight, moving quietly through the house like a man trying not to wake someone. I pretended to be asleep when he slipped into bed beside me, smelling like wine and expensive cologne and other people's laughter. The next morning, he brought me coffee in bed and a bouquet of grocery store flowers, the kind they keep in buckets near the checkout lanes. "Happy belated birthday, beautiful," he said, setting the flowers on my nightstand with a flourish that felt rehearsed. "I'm sorry about last night." Henderson insisted on hitting 3 different restaurants. You know how these client dinners go. I knew exactly how they went. I also knew that David could have left at any time if he had wanted to, if I had mattered enough for him to want to. "It's fine," I said, accepting the flowers with a smile that felt like wearing a mask. "Thank you for these." And it was fine, in the way that drowning is fine once you stop struggling against the water. The pattern continued for weeks. Months. David's career demanded more and more of his time, and I gave more and more of myself to accommodate it. I canceled plans with friends when clients needed dinner parties. I rearranged my own schedule to accommodate his business trips. I smiled and nodded when he told me about the important cases he was working on, the important people he was meeting, the important places his career was taking him. I was never part of the important things. In October, David was invited to speak at a legal conference in Chicago. 3 days of presentations and networking events and cocktail parties where lawyers would talk about cases and careers and all the things that mattered in David's world. "You should come with me," he said over breakfast, not looking up from his laptop. "Make a little vacation out of it." For a moment, something hopeful fluttered in my chest. A trip together. A chance to talk without the constant interruption of phone calls and emails. A chance to remember why we had fallen in love in the first place. "I'd like that," I said. "I could book us a nice hotel room. Maybe we could see a show one night." "Actually," David said, still typing, "I'll be pretty busy with conference stuff during the day, and there are networking events most evenings. You'd probably be bored out of your mind." The hope in my chest collapsed like a punctured balloon. "Then why did you invite me?" "Because I thought you might enjoy Chicago. Do some shopping. Visit the art museum. You're always saying you want to travel more." But not with him, apparently. I would be a tourist in a city where my husband was building his reputation, exploring museums alone while he built connections that would never include me. "Maybe I'll stay home," I said. "Catch up on some things around the house." David nodded without looking up. "Whatever you prefer. I'll probably be too busy to spend much time together anyway." He left for Chicago on a Thursday morning. I drove him to the airport, kissed him goodbye at the departure gate, and drove home to an empty house that felt both peaceful and utterly hollow. I decided to clean out the closets. It seemed like a productive way to spend 3 days alone, and I had been putting it off for months. I started with the guest room, sorting through boxes of old books and holiday decorations and wedding gifts we had never used. At the bottom of one box, I found our wedding album. I sat on the floor of the guest room and flipped through pages of photographs from what was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. There we were, young and smiling and full of promises we had made in front of everyone we loved. David looking handsome in his tuxedo, me radiant in a dress I had saved for months to buy. Our families and friends gathered around us, celebrating a love that had seemed unshakable. I studied the pictures of us dancing, cutting cake, laughing at speeches that I could no longer remember. In every photo, we looked like people who adored each other, people who would never take each other for granted, people who would remember birthdays and choose each other over career opportunities, and grow old together with stories to tell about all the ways they had cherished their time. I closed the album and put it back in the box. Those people felt like strangers now. That evening, I called my sister Rachel in Portland. We talked every few weeks. Quick conversations about work and weather and the safe subjects that families discuss when they live too far apart to know the real details of each other's lives. "How was your birthday?" she asked. "Did David surprise you with something wonderful?" I found myself telling her the truth. About the forgotten birthday, about the flowers that came a day late, about the trip to Chicago where I wasn't really invited, about the slow, steady erosion of a marriage that had once felt like the foundation of everything. Rachel was quiet for a long time after I finished. "Sarah," she finally said, her voice gentle but firm, "when was the last time you were happy?" The question hit me like a physical blow. When was the last time I had been happy? Not content? Not resigned? Not making the best of things? Actually happy? I couldn't remember. "I don't know," I admitted. "I don't think I remember how to be happy." "Then, maybe it's time to learn again." We talked for 2 more hours. Rachel told me about her job at the nonprofit, about the women she worked with who were trying to rebuild their lives after leaving relationships that had diminished them. She told me about her own divorce 3 years earlier, how terrifying and liberating it had been to choose herself over a marriage that was slowly killing her spirit. "You don't have to stay small to make someone else feel big," she said before we hung up. "You deserve to take up space in your own life." After we said goodbye, I sat in my quiet house and thought about taking up space. About what that might look like, about who I might be if I stopped folding myself into shapes that made other people comfortable. David came home from Chicago full of stories about the conference, the connections he had made, the opportunities that might open up because of the conversations he had had over cocktails and client dinners. He talked through dinner, animated in a way I rarely saw anymore, describing presentations and panel discussions and networking events with the enthusiasm of someone who had found exactly where he belonged. "It sounds like it was exactly what you needed," I said when he finally paused for breath. "It really was. I'm thinking about applying to join the conference planning committee next year. It would mean more travel, more evening commitments, but the visibility would be incredible for my career." More travel. More evening commitments. More time away from a marriage that already felt like something he visited occasionally between more important obligations. "What do you think?" he asked. "Would you be okay with me taking on something like that?" He was asking for my permission to disappear even more completely from our life together, asking me to smile and nod while he built a future that had less and less room for me in it. "I think," I said carefully, "that you should do whatever makes you happy." He smiled and reached across the table to squeeze my hand. "I knew you'd understand. This is why I married you, Sarah. You always see the big picture." The big picture. I wondered if the big picture included a wife who felt like a ghost in her own marriage, who spent her birthday alone while her husband celebrated someone else's success, who had forgotten what it felt like to be chosen, to be prioritized, to be loved in ways that required sacrifice from the person doing the loving. I squeezed his hand back and smiled, because that's what I always did. But something had shifted inside me during those 3 days alone. Something Rachel had said about deserving to take up space. Something about learning to be happy again. The next few weeks passed in their usual rhythm. David worked late most nights, preparing for cases and cultivating clients, and building the career that seemed to matter more than anything else in his life. I maintained the house, managed the social calendar, played the role of the supportive wife who asked for nothing and complained about even less. But I also started doing things differently. Small things at first. I bought myself flowers on Friday afternoons, bright bouquets that I arranged in vases around the house. I started reading again, books that David would have dismissed as frivolous, but that filled me with ideas and perspectives I had forgotten I craved. I called Rachel more often. Long conversations that left me feeling connected to someone who saw me as more than a supporting character in someone else's story. I also started paying attention to my marriage in ways I had avoided for years. I noticed how often David talked without asking me questions in return, how he made plans that affected both of us without consulting me first, how he had trained me to accommodate his needs while remaining oblivious to my own. I noticed how tired I was, not just physically tired, but soul-deep exhausted from carrying the emotional weight of a relationship where only one person's feelings seemed to matter. In November, David announced that he had been invited to join the conference planning committee. "It's perfect timing," he said over dinner at the expensive restaurant, where he had finally taken me to make up for my forgotten birthday. "They want someone with my expertise in corporate law, and the networking opportunities will be incredible." "What does that mean for your schedule?" I asked. "More travel, obviously. Monthly meetings in different cities, plus the actual conferences, which could be anywhere in the country, and there will be evening calls with other committee members to coordinate everything." I set down my fork and looked at him across the table. Really looked at him. David was handsome and successful and charming in all the ways that had first attracted me to him 15 years ago. But somewhere along the way he had become a stranger who shared my last name and my bed, but none of my actual life. "When would you be home?" I asked. "What do you mean?" When would you actually be home? Available to spend time together? Available to have a conversation or share a meal or just exist in the same space?" David frowned, clearly confused by the question. "I'm home most nights. We're together all the time." But we weren't together. We were simply in the same location, like roommates who shared expenses but led completely separate lives. David's attention was always elsewhere, on his phone or his laptop or his plans for advancing his career. When he talked to me, it was usually to ask me to do something for him, or to tell me about something that would require me to rearrange my own life to accommodate his. "David," I said, choosing my words carefully, "when was the last time you asked me how I was feeling about something? Not logistics or schedules, or what I thought about your work situation. How I was feeling." He stared at me for a moment, his expression shifting from confusion to irritation. "I ask you things all the time." "You ask me to do things. That's different." "Sarah, where is this coming from? I thought you'd be excited about this opportunity. It's a huge step forward for my career." "Your career," I repeated. "What about my career? What about my life? What about us?" "Your life is our life," he said, his voice taking on that patient tone he used when he thought I was being unreasonable. "We're a team. When I succeed, we both succeed." But I wasn't part of his success. I was just the person who made it possible by handling everything else, by being so low maintenance that he never had to consider what I needed or wanted. I was infrastructure, not a partner. "I don't feel like we're a team," I said quietly. "I feel like I'm support staff." David's jaw tightened. "That's not fair, Sarah. Everything I do is for us, for our future. I work hard so we can have a good life." "We already have a good life. Or we could, if you were ever here to live it." "This is about the birthday thing, isn't it?" "I already apologized for that. I already explained about the client dinner." "It's not about one birthday, David. It's about all of them. It's about every dinner and every weekend and every conversation where your work comes first. It's about feeling like I don't exist unless you need something from me." David sat back in his chair, looking genuinely bewildered. "I had no idea you felt this way." And that was perhaps the most telling thing of all. He had no idea because he had never asked, because my feelings were not something that occurred to him to consider unless they interfered with his plans. "I need you to turn down the committee," I said. "What?" "I need you to choose us. Choose me, just once." David was quiet for a long moment, and I found myself holding my breath, waiting to see if 15 years of marriage was worth enough to him to say no to something that would advance his career. "Sarah," he said finally, his voice gentle but firm, "I can't do that. This is too important. Too big an opportunity to pass up." And there it was. His choice, clear and unambiguous. His career would always matter more than his marriage. His success would always take priority over my happiness. I would always be asked to sacrifice while he pursued whatever he wanted most. "Okay," I said, picking up my purse, "then I think we need to talk about what that means for us." "What do you mean?" "I mean, I can't keep doing this, David. I can't keep being married to someone who sees me as optional." I stood up from the table and walked out of the restaurant, leaving David sitting alone with the expensive wine he had ordered to celebrate his latest opportunity. I drove home in silence, past houses where other couples were probably having their own difficult conversations or enjoying quiet evenings together or fighting about normal things like money and children and whose turn it was to take out the trash. When I got home, I sat in my car in the driveway for 20 minutes, looking at the house that had been my world for so many years. The house where I had bent myself into smaller and smaller shapes to accommodate someone else's expanding dreams. The house where I had learned to want less so that David could have more. I was tired of wanting less. Tired of being less. Tired of pretending that a marriage where only one person's needs mattered was enough for me. David came home an hour later, his face tight with the kind of controlled anger that meant he thought I was being irrational and dramatic, and all the other words men used when women finally stopped accepting unacceptable situations. "Can we please talk about this reasonably?" he said, hanging his coat in the closet with precise, measured movements. "I thought that's what we were doing at dinner." "You walked out of a restaurant, Sarah. You left me sitting there like an idiot. How do you think I've felt for the past 5 years, sitting alone at dinners you canceled at the last minute? Explaining to friends why you couldn't make it to events we had committed to together? Celebrating my birthday by myself while you chose work over me again?" David ran his hand through his hair, a gesture I recognized from all the times he had tried to solve problems by applying logic to emotional situations. "Look," he said, "I understand that you're feeling neglected. And I'm sorry about that, but this committee position isn't going to last forever. Just a couple of years, and then things can go back to normal." Normal. As if the way we had been living was something I should want to return to. "What if I said no?" I asked. "What if I said I needed you to choose between the committee and our marriage?" David stared at me. "You wouldn't do that." "Why not?" "Because you're not that kind of person. You're reasonable. You understand how important my career is." "More important than me?" "That's not what I said. It's what you meant." We stood in our living room, surrounded by furniture we had chosen together and photographs from happier times, and I realized that we had been having different conversations for years. David had been talking about building a successful life, and I had been talking about building a meaningful one. He had been focused on acquiring things and achieving goals, and I had been focused on connection and partnership and love. Neither of us was wrong, but we were no longer compatible. "I want you to leave," I said. "What?" "I want you to pack a bag and stay somewhere else tonight. I need time to think, and I can't do that with you here trying to convince me that I'm being unreasonable." "Sarah, you're overreacting. We can work this out. We just need to communicate better." "We've been communicating perfectly," I said. "You've been telling me that your career matters more than our marriage, and I've been telling you that I accept that. The communication is fine. The situation is what's broken." David looked like I had slapped him. "I love you, Sarah. I've always loved you." "I know you do, but you love your work more, and I can't compete with that anymore." "I don't want to compete with that anymore." He packed a bag with the same methodical precision he brought to everything else, folding shirts and selecting ties as if he were preparing for a business trip. Maybe, in his mind, he was. Maybe he thought this was just another problem to be managed, another situation where his patience and reasonableness would eventually prevail. "I'll call you tomorrow," he said, standing at the front door with his overnight bag, "when you've had time to calm down and think about this rationally." After he left, I walked through the house and turned on every light. I opened windows to let in the cold November air. I put on music, loud enough to fill all the spaces that had been quiet for too long. I called Rachel. I told him to leave, I said when she answered. Oh, honey, how do you feel? I thought about it. I felt scared and sad and uncertain about everything that would come next. But underneath all of that, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. I feel awake, I said. Rachel was quiet for a moment. Good, she said finally. That's good. We talked until nearly midnight. Rachel told me about the legal aid clinic where she volunteered, about lawyers who specialized in helping women navigate divorce proceedings. She told me about support groups and therapists, and all the resources that existed for people who were ready to start over. You don't have to decide everything tonight, she said. You just have to decide what you need right now. What I needed right now was to remember who I had been before I became half of a partnership where only one person's dreams mattered. What I needed was to stop apologizing for taking up space. What I needed was to learn how to be happy again. David called the next morning, just as he had promised. His voice was calm and measured, the tone he used in court when he was building a case. Have you thought about what we discussed last night? He asked. Yes. And I think we should separate. Officially. There was a long pause. Sarah, you're throwing away 15 years of marriage over a work opportunity. Don't you think that's a little extreme? I'm not throwing anything away, David. I'm just finally admitting what we've both known for years. We want different things. We've become different people. We can go to counseling. We can work on this. I don't want to work on it anymore. I don't want to spend more years trying to convince you to prioritize our marriage. I want to be with someone who chooses me without being asked. I do choose you. No, you don't. You choose your career and then try to fit me into whatever time is left over. That's not the same thing. Over the next few weeks, David tried everything. He sent flowers to my office. He wrote long emails explaining how much I meant to him. He canceled meetings to take me to lunch, gestures that felt desperate and temporary, like someone cramming for an exam they had ignored all semester. But I was done studying for a test I could never pass. Done trying to earn love from someone who had already decided what mattered most to him. I hired a lawyer, a woman Rachel had recommended, who specialized in helping women rebuild their lives after marriages that had diminished them. Margaret was in her 50s, with gray hair and a direct manner that reminded me of my grandmother. What do you want from this divorce? She asked during our first meeting. I want my life back, I said. I want to remember what it feels like to matter. Margaret smiled. That's the best reason I've ever heard. The divorce proceedings were surprisingly amicable. David was shocked but not vindictive. He seemed to genuinely believe that if he could just present the right argument, make the right case, I would realize I was making a mistake and come back home. But I wasn't making a mistake. I was making a choice. The first real choice I had made for myself in years. I kept the house. David had never been particularly attached to it anyway, and I needed something familiar while everything else in my life was changing. I also went back to school, enrolling in a master's program in social work that I had always wanted to pursue but had put off because it would have interfered with David's schedule. For the first time in my adult life, I made plans without considering anyone else's needs first. I traveled to Portland to visit Rachel. I took weekend trips to places I had always wanted to see. I bought a dog, a golden retriever puppy I named Charlie, who had no agenda other than being loved and giving love in return. 6 months after David moved out, I ran into him at the grocery store. He looked good, successful, and confident in his expensive suit. He was with a woman I didn't recognize, someone young and polished, who laughed at something he said, and touched his arm in the way that suggested they were more than colleagues. Sarah, he said, looking genuinely pleased to see me. You look great. How are you? I'm happy, I said, and realized it was true. We talked for a few minutes about practical things. The house, the divorce papers that were almost finalized, mutual friends who had taken sides or tried to remain neutral. David mentioned the conference committee, how well it was going, the opportunities that were opening up because of his involvement. I'm glad it worked out for you, I said, and meant it. What about you? Are you seeing anyone? I thought about the man I had been having coffee with. A teacher from the university who made me laugh and asked questions about my thoughts and feelings and dreams. Someone who seemed genuinely interested in who I was, not just what I could do for him. I'm dating, I said, taking things slowly. David nodded, and for a moment I saw something flicker across his face. Regret, maybe, or just the recognition that we had both moved on to lives that no longer included each other. I hope you're happy, he said. I am. I really am. And I was. Not because I had found someone new, but because I had found myself again. Because I had learned that love shouldn't require you to disappear. That partnership shouldn't mean one person grows while the other shrinks. That happiness wasn't something you had to earn by being small enough to fit into someone else's life. I finished my degree 2 years later. Rachel flew out for the graduation ceremony, bringing flowers and a card that made me cry happy tears in the middle of the auditorium. I started working at a nonprofit that helped women transition out of difficult situations, using my own experience to help others recognize their worth and reclaim their lives. David remarried the woman from the grocery store. I heard about it from mutual friends who weren't sure whether to mention it or pretend they didn't know. I sent a card, a simple congratulations that I meant sincerely. I hoped he had learned something from our marriage. I hoped he would choose differently this time. As for me, I learned that starting over isn't the same as starting from scratch. I brought wisdom and strength and self-knowledge to my new life that I hadn't possessed when I was 23, and thought love meant sacrificing everything for someone else's dreams. I learned that happiness isn't something you wait for someone else to give you. It's something you create by making choices that honor who you are and what you need. I learned to take up space, to speak up when something didn't feel right, to ask for what I wanted instead of hoping someone would care enough to guess. I learned that the right person will see your needs as important as their own. That real love multiplies rather than divides. That partnership means choosing each other every day instead of expecting one person to do all the choosing. Most importantly, I learned that it's never too late to save yourself. That you don't have to stay in situations that diminish you just because you've already invested time in them. That starting over can be the most loving thing you do, both for yourself and for the people who deserve the fullest, truest version of who you are. The house where David and I had built our life together became the house where I built my life for myself. The kitchen where I had cooked for his colleagues became the kitchen where I hosted dinner parties for friends who actually wanted to spend time with me. The bedroom where I had felt invisible became the place where I slept peacefully, no longer waiting for someone to choose me over their other priorities. Sometimes, late at night when Charlie is snoring softly at the foot of the bed and the house is quiet around me, I think about the woman I used to be, the one who bent herself into impossible shapes to accommodate someone else's expanding dreams, the one who apologized for wanting things, and asked for nothing, and believed that love meant erasing yourself for someone else's comfort. I don't miss her, but I'm grateful to her. She taught me what I didn't want. She showed me the difference between settling and choosing. She gave me the gift of her own exhaustion, the weight of her silence, the breaking point that became the starting point for everything that came after. I am 43 years old, and I am finally learning how to be happy. Not the desperate, grasping kind of happiness that depends on other people's choices, but the steady, sustainable kind that comes from knowing your own worth and refusing to accept less than you deserve. It took me 15 years to learn that lesson, but I learned it. And now I spend my days helping other women learn it too, watching them discover their own strength, their own voices, their own capacity for joy, watching them choose themselves, sometimes for the first time in their lives. The weight of silence nearly crushed me, but breaking that silence, speaking up for myself, choosing my own happiness over someone else's convenience, that weight lifted everything. It lifted me back to life.